Today, I want to talk to you about pleasure. My word of the year for 2021 was more, but then I decided to add pleasure, more pleasure, because I've been having great success and having a really wonderful time as I've been leaning more into my authentic self and doing the work that I help others do. So I wanted more of all of the good that's been coming to me. But I also realized after reading a book called Pleasure Activism by Adrienne Marie Brown, how much I had been excluding pleasure from the goodness in my life. Things were good in that I was achieving a lot of milestones that I wanted, reaching a lot of goals, having a lot more happiness and joy. But I wasn't really focused on my own pleasure, what makes me feel good in my body and beyond. And so I decided to really make this year a big focus on how do I create more pleasure. First piece of that is figuring out what that even means for me. Because as women, so many of us are conditioned to believe that our pleasure doesn't matter, or certainly that our pleasure comes last, that we are there to be in service of the pleasure of others through caretaking and in many other ways, that our work, our mission, our purpose is to create pleasure for others and not to think about our own pleasure. And that, in fact, thinking about our own pleasure, acknowledging it, asking for it, is selfish. It's greedy. Who are you to do that? That's what bad girls do. There's a lot of conditioning and negativity around the idea of pleasure. And by pleasure, I don't mean just sexual, although that too, but I'm talking about in all ways. What feels good, from the clothes that we wear, to how we treat our skin, to how we move our bodies, what we surround ourselves with, the work that we engage in, the relationships that we're in, everything. What brings us pleasure? What feels good? And so this year, I'm focused on, for myself, reclaiming pleasure. And I am realizing, and I think the reason I'm finally prioritizing it, is understanding through the feminist lens what that means and why women and I have not put a priority on pleasure in the past, and how I've been conditioned to not believe that my pleasure counts or matters, or even worse, that asking for my pleasure is bad. As I look at it through that lens, then I begin to understand that reclaiming my pleasure is reclaiming my power within the structures that we live in a patriarchal society. And I want to say too, I recognize fully that I'm a white woman, which brings with it an incredible amount of privilege, and a privilege to lean into my pleasure more than women of color. Women of color, everything I just said about pleasure being denied was to the nth degree more for women of color than even for white women, by far. And so reclaiming pleasure for all of us, for all women, and even for men, but I'm speaking specifically for women who have been historically denied pleasure, and again, women of color much more so. Reclaiming that pleasure is reclaiming power. And so I wanted to just share today a few questions or prompts to get you thinking about your own pleasure. If perhaps hearing this is making you think, yeah, pleasure is missing from my life too, or it just hasn't been a focus, or I don't even know if I have pleasure in my life. What could that look like? I want to give you a few things to begin to think about, to explore this for yourself. And before I do, let me say I'm recording this from a hotel because this weekend I am treating myself to a solo hotel stay. I'm a mom and it's a pandemic, and I don't get a lot of time away or to myself. I don't get much solitude, and I'm an introvert and I need solitude. And so this is a new thing that I am focused on moving forward, that once a quarter, I will give myself 2 nights, a weekend away in a hotel to go and do whatever brings me pleasure. I'm doing some work because my work brings me pleasure, especially being able to do it in a way that is uninterrupted, where I can give it all the thought that I want. I can do only the things that bring me joy in my work, including this. I can take advantage of the beautiful light coming in through this window at my hotel, and the fact that I've been able to treat my skin well and, color my hair and do all of these things that make me feel comfortable being on camera. If you're listening to the podcast, you won't see the video, but made me feel comfortable to do this. And so doing some work while I'm here is part of the pleasure. But so are all the other things I'm doing, like giving myself treats of some delicious food, sleeping in a bed and having the whole thing to myself to spread out, giving myself a face mask and taking more than one shower in a day. That's something I never get to do. Giving myself a pedicure. All of the things that I'm doing while I'm here to remind myself that I am deserving of pleasure, that I am a whole person outside of my experience of being a wife and being a mom and being a business owner. That I'm a whole person who deserves and has a inherent right to pleasure and fulfillment. And so I am staking that claim by making it happen, by carving out a weekend to be here to say, I deserve this, and giving myself that space for it. If it's something you've never done, you might want to consider it, especially for the moms who are listening who don't get much time to yourself. Treat yourself to some time away to focus on your pleasure. Okay, I just want to share that because I think it's really appropriate for the topic that I am recording this whilst really living this out, focusing on my pleasure. And the prompts I want to share are really some things that I got thinking about as I was reading Pleasure Activism, which I will link to for you if you want to check out the book. I think it's really great. It is a little more focused on sex and physical pleasure, although I read it through the lens of a mindset coach and can tell you that all of it is really applicable to mindset work as well. And so one of the quotes in the book is that we've been raised to fear the yes within ourselves. Ooh, that one really hit me because we have been so conditioned for all those reasons I said to be afraid for when we have a feeling of, yes, I want that. I need that. Our own desires cause a lot of fear. What will that say about me? What will others think? What does this mean? Am I selfish? Am I greedy? Am I a bad person? Because we are so taught to put ourselves last and that view all of those things as being selfish and how do we be a good girl. And so one of the things I want you to just ask yourself is what yes is calling out from you? What yes is calling out to you to be heard and expressed and validated? Get quiet and listen for those yeses, those pleasures that are calling out to you, wanting to be expressed. Another part of the book that I loved, or another quote from the book, is let yes come from every part of you before you share you. And again, she's talking about sexual agency, but boy, how true is this for so many of us as moms and as business owners or as employees or in so many of our relationships where we've been so conditioned to believe that we must share and give of ourselves and care for others without any thought of our own wants and needs before we even begin to think about our own desires. And so a prompt or a question for you to begin to mull over is how can you let yes come from every part of you before you share yourself today? Meaning, how can you listen to your own wants and needs today before you begin giving to everyone else? And finally, one other quote that I thought was really valuable was, what are your wants and what do you need to feel safer? And again, she's talking about sexual agency here, about, permission and thinking about what feels good in a safe way to go after what you want physically. But also, rather than putting others first, I want you to just think about any situation, what your want is. And when wanting is new for you, when pleasure is new for you, it will probably feel scary the first time you try to assert yourself and say, these are my wants and desires and I want them met. Whether that's just feeling scary internally about what does this say about myself, what will I believe about myself if I do this, or externally of what will others think, what will others say, how will others react to me asking for or demanding my own pleasures. And so if it feels scary or new, then consider how can you make that want or that need or pursuing that want or need feel safer. So the thing to ask yourself here, a journaling prompt or a question to consider is, what do you want most right now? And how can you ask for that or pursue that in a way that feels safe? So maybe you want space, you hear me talking about hotel, you want to do that, but that doesn't feel safe to you right now. It doesn't feel safe to ask for something that big for yourself, to take that much time away. Maybe a whole weekend seems like I can't do that. What if you could ask for a few hours to get away, to go for a walk somewhere or go for a long drive? Or what if you ask for one night? And I don't mean asking permission. It's not about others, but it's about creating that safety for yourself. If you're not ready to make a big ask of yourself for a whole weekend, even though maybe that's your deepest desire, then you start with asking yourself, hey self, could I do one night and feel safe? Would that be okay? Could I do a few hours and feel safe? Would that feel okay? So it's not about asking permission of others, it's about asking permission of ourselves to create that safety for ourselves to go about doing this. And so finally, I just want to say, I hope that all of this has been some delicious food for thought for you on what pleasure could look like in your life, how you can begin to think about your pleasure. How can you make the coming days, weeks, months, this year more pleasurable? How can you find pleasure in the everyday, right now, in every moment, every action? How can you think about and consider your pleasure and what would make whatever you're doing in this moment feel even just a little bit more pleasurable? And how can you find pleasure in the journey that you're on, in the unknown, in the what's nextness of what we're doing, where normally that causes anxiety? How could I make my experiences more pleasurable? And I want to leave you with this, which is you are allowed to want. You are allowed to enjoy. You are allowed to put yourself first. Despite all the conditioning you've received, things you've been told, even your own internal beliefs right now, your pleasure is your birthright. You are fully entitled and inherently worthy of pleasure, as much so as any other person, as much so as any white man. So seek out your pleasure, create it for yourself, and let yourself know that you are worthy of it, and you will keep yourself safe in the process of going after it.